It'll be fun.
So we have 11 people joining us and coming into the room. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello, gardener friends. Welcome to you all. Lovely to see your faces. And we have 17 people. They're coming in quickly, Harry. They want to hear what you have to say.
Good, good, good.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening with Harry Burton today, gabbing about growing apples. Everything you've ever wanted to know is going to probably be covered to some degree here, but this is just the first time. I have a feeling you're going to be back with us on a regular basis, Harry. You've got so much expertise.
All came from mistakes.
Well, that's the best way to learn. Welcome, everyone. Hello, there's Carol Gall, seeing lots of friends showing up. Hello, gardener friends. Great. Thank you for joining us today. We're already up to 26 people, Harry. They're anxious to hear what you have to say. Hello, everybody. Listen, while you're joining the Zoom room, I invite you to go to your chat window and just tell us where you're coming from. And also, if you want to be added to our email list so that you know what we're doing, when we're doing it, how to get into the Zoom, include your email if you want to be on our email list. So fire us off a little chat about where you're coming from today and what your email is. I apologize. Harry says the connection's not all that great. Fortunately, Harry's connection is fabulous. So if I get too choppy, Harry will just continue on today. Welcome, everyone. We'll give everybody a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Right at 3 o'clock, we're up to 34 people already, Harry.
Good, good.
Yeah. So it's a great turnout. Welcome to Gabbing About Growing Apples today with Harry Burton. We're really honored to have Harry with us. I'll tell you more about him in just a few minutes. We'll let everybody get settled into the room. Let us know where you're coming from. Hi, Jan and Duncan. Got people coming from all over the place. Douglas from Powell River. Nancy from South BC. This is wonderful. Lovely to see you all.
Dorothy Frost from
Susan, Quadra, Richard from Langley. Welcome. Just include your email if you'd like to be added to our growing email list. We'll be starting a newsletter soon as well. If you want to be a part of the newsletter, just put your email in the chat and we'll capture that. Lovely. We're up to 42 people. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening. We'll get started in a few minutes with the Apple King of British Columbia. That will be Harry Burton. You know, Harry, I've wanted to drop in on some of these wonderful apple festivals that you host every year, and I just haven't made it to Salt Spring to do that. Are you going to have that this year, you think?
Well, we're not sure. We're hoping to, but yeah, we're hoping to. October 3rd.
Great. Wonderful. Yeah, I saw October 3rd on the some of the literature that you sent to me. Welcome, everyone. People are joining us very quickly. We're up to 48 gardeners. Hello, gardener friends. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. Oh, there's Alan. Hello, Alan. Rhonda, lovely to see you all. Cora, Lynn.
Just going to check here. Oh, I need to check.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening. Harry, could you wave at everybody so they know that
Hello,
that's
hello,
you,
hello.
even though there's your name? Our special guest today is Harry Burton from Luscious Apple Organic Orchards from Salt Spring Island. Harry will get started in just a few minutes. We still have people entering the room. We'll give everybody a few minutes to get in and get settled. Thank you for muting, everyone. I see you've all done that so beautifully. That gives us all much better experience. I think that my Wi-Fi connection is pretty sketchy today. I apologize for that. I'm coming at you from the north end of Quadra Island, and we have a satellite that is sometimes impeded by a lot of big trees. So hopefully you can all hear me okay. Can I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Can everybody hear me okay? Good enough? Great, thank you. Still admitting folks, we're up to 63. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening. Today we're focused on gabbing about growing apples, and we have the king of apples with us. That's Harry Burton from Apple Luscious Organic Orchards on Salt Spring Island. Harry really is dedicated and passionate about growing apples.
We just lost you.
There we go. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I got bumped off there. Thanks for your patience, everybody. I just need to check our room. We've got folks coming in very quickly. We're up to about 70 some people. I don't want anyone to miss out. 70. Thank you for your patience, everyone. I keep getting bumped off, so I am making you the co-host now, Harry, in case I get lost in space here. You can just take over until I get back on. I know you have a tremendous amount of information for us all, and we still have folks coming into the room. Here comes Brenda and Judy. We'll admit everybody. Wonderful. Welcome again, everyone. Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening. There are 84 of us dedicated gardeners here from all over British Columbia, some people from the United States. My name is Lucretia. I go by Lou. And I am coming to you from Quadra Island, the north end of Quadra Island. My internet is a little sketchy today, which is the price you pay for living in a remote area, living in paradise on a remote, somewhat remote island. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started. Today, our special guest is Harry Burton. Harry is the king of apples. I don't think anybody can really dispute that. I know he's very modest and probably doesn't necessarily like to hear me say that, but that's how I think of you, Harry. There doesn't seem to be anything about apples that you don't know. Harry is growing over 200 varieties of apples at his Apple Luscious Organic Orchard on Salt Spring Island. And today, Harry is going to cover a lot of ground about apples. Please type any questions you have today about apples in the chat box, and I will read them out, and Harry will answer them for us. I want to remind you that Gabbing About Gardening is based on the principles of the gift economy. That means that we don't charge anything to bring Gabbing About Gardening to you, but we do invite you to contribute whatever you are able to contribute to keep this programming going. We share with the people who participate, and we also support a wide range of gardening initiatives around the planet. We're especially focused on supporting permaculture youth and the refugee camps in Kenya. So that's where your money goes, as well as contributing towards what our guest speakers are doing and contributing towards them. I'll drop an email where you can contribute through e-transfer, and your donations.
Oops, she just left. I bet it's windy. I bet the wind is causing the problems.
Hi guys, while the meeting's pretty chill, I was gonna ask a question.
Okay.
Could you guys check out? Could you guys check out my YouTube? It's called Little Mosquito Disease.
Could you please mute for now, and you can write something in the chat room, mosquito doozies. Harry, I have made you co-host, so I'm going to just turn it over to you now, Harry, to introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us how you got into this beautiful obsession with apples. And I'm turning it over to you now, Harry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank all you folk for giving me a much appreciated break from my work, because if I wasn't doing this, I'd be working today. And this time of year is probably the busiest time of year in the orchard. I'm selling apple trees out of my nursery. I'm cutting sign wood, and I'm getting ready to sell sign wood next week or so. And I'm planting. I put about 50 new trees in this year. And I'm also grafting. Right now I'm grafting every evening. And as soon as it rains, I'll be grafting all day. I graft down the basement, which is right below this. So that's what we're up to right now. Busiest time of year. People don't understand that if they're not connected with the orchard. First of all, we at Apple Luscious are certified organic. And what that means is somebody is monitoring everything I do here. And it also means I have a set of rules. I can't use anything that's man-made on the orchard. And people tell me that out in other places, some growers actually put poison on their food, but I can't imagine that. So that's one of the incentives. We grow about 210 of the best apple varieties available. This year, we actually took out about 5 or 6 varieties that just weren't all that good. I mean, I had to sell them in the market, and people eat them and they just, okay, it's okay. Well, a tree like that's going to go. And then I put in about 5 or 6 other new varieties. I consider us a trial orchard. We have many varieties here that don't grow in this part of the country. And for instance, I just got one cutting in from Poland. And so it'll be very interesting to see how that grows here. Ambrosia is created in the Okanagan. I'm planting it for the 3rd time on the coast here because Ambrosia doesn't seem to like the coast. This is do or die. If it doesn't take this time, then it's out, it's gone. And we grow about 50 of the best red flesh varieties you can get, and they are just amazing. The chefs love them. We organized the Salt Spring Apple Festival, and it's due to happen this year on Sunday, October 3rd. So I'm going to show you a few things just to get started here. First of all, I tend to sell in stores, and if I'm selling in stores, I give this poster to the store, which is our taste guarantee, and that explains how we grow at the orchard here. The other thing we have that we sell, and all the money goes to Africa, is a big poster. It's 60 of the favorite apples of Salt Spring. These are all hand painted, and they are 50% of actual size. And the other thing that we have, this was created by Bryony Penn. This is a beautiful poster that she made 2 years ago. And what it is, it's a shape of Salt Spring. It's a shape of Salt Spring, and the layers are all the different apple varieties that we displayed that year in the Apple Festival. There's 340 different apple names on that map of Salt Spring. Okay, now, just a few little things here that I think are neat is here we have an apple bowl that's 13.5 inches in diameter, and this was made from a Salt Spring apple tree. We started growing apples here in 1860, and so this would have been a very old tree. And by the way, when this is cut out of the tree, the piece of wood is actually in this direction. So this is the orientation that wood would have been in the tree. This book is a historical book. There are only 2 books written in the 1800s about apples, and this is one of them. The Downey brothers collected every variety of apple that existed according to them, and they wrote about it in this book. And so this is a real treasure chest for me. It's an amazing book. And I got that from Mrs. Ruckle, who was about 95 at the time. It came from the attic at Ruckle Farm. And Ruckle Farm started growing here about 1872. The other thing I want to show here is this sort of thing, and I'm not pushing a product. I'm simply saying mycorrhiza, we should not be planting any fruit trees at all without maybe half a teaspoon of mycorrhiza dusted right onto the roots. This is a symbiotic fungus that will make your trees stronger. Okay, let's get started with some biology now. Could someone make my screen big? I'm not trying to be egocentric. I'm just trying to be able to see what everybody is seeing. Could someone do that, please?
Referring back to when you said you only use man-made products on your farms, I think that's very sexist.
Sorry. I meant to say only natural products. That was a mistake.
No, you good.
Okay. What we have here is an apple. I've cut it in cross section, and what it shows is an apple star, a 5-pointed star. And each one of those stars contains 2 seeds. So the normal apple contains 10 seeds, and it requires 10 seeds in order for this apple to grow properly. If the seeds on the bottom here hadn't grown or hadn't been pollinated, then this apple would have been misshapen down here. So that's why pollination is so important. And if you think of the blossom as the female and the pollen as the male, apples all need pollen from some other variety to come and pollinate that tree. And it takes 10 pollinations in order to make a proper apple. If you're talking about corn, it takes about 400. Every kernel of corn must have pollen going right down the corn silk to each kernel of corn to pollinate. So that's why pollination is so important. Now, each of these seeds then would have different DNA than the other one. So these would be like 10 brothers and sisters. And so the way you get a new variety of apple is to plant seeds, plant thousands and thousands of seeds, and then just pick the ones that are good. That's what the research centers do. And the odds are about 1 in 80,000 because the DNA is so diverse in an apple that the odds of making a new apple variety is very, very slim. So the thing you can do to help that, and what some research centers do, they'll make sure that the exact pollen, Jack, could you be quiet? The exact pollen, they would choose the exact pollen that they want on that blossom. So they are controlling the male part of the blossom. And that way you can improve the odds of getting a really good cross. Okay, so if you want to create a new apple tree, then you plant a seed, and it's called a seedling. If you want to create an exact copy, then you graft, and that's what I'm doing downstairs. And the grafting process is fairly straightforward.
Doug, are you watching?
What you do with a graft is I buy rootstock. I don't have time to make it. I buy rootstock, and then I attach my top onto it, and I tape that. And the tape is doing two things. The tape is keeping the moisture in, and it's giving that graft some strength. And this graft I just did this afternoon, this graft is going to sit inside the house for about a month, because you want the graft to have a nice warm environment so it heals properly. So after a month, then they will go outside. This is a barrel of rootstock. This is 50 roots here. They come in bundles of 50. This is bud 118, and I would suggest that's the best rootstock you can get for the coast. I'm giving up on M111 and M106, which is the standard that we used to use here, but it just doesn't work. This bud 118 is an amazing rootstock. And what I've got here is the grafts I did yesterday. So this is in a pail with sawdust in it. And this particular pail I grafted on March 14th. That's a little sign, March 14th. That way I'll know how long, when it's had a month in the basement. And the neat thing here is I use color coding. So the color coding pink here means a dwarf, and the color coding white tape means that it's a full-size tree. So that is basically the whole concept. So if we're doing grafting, then we have to join a root to the top. And I tend to do that with what's called a whip and tongue. It's a special type of graft. In August, I'll be using another type of graft called T-bud. And one thing I want to show you, which is quite interesting, is this particular piece of rootstock. By the way, I was lucky enough to have a beautiful grafting knife made by a local guy on Salt Spring. And grafting knives have only one bevel. It's a perfectly flat bottom, perfectly flat, with one bevel on the top. So it's like a chisel. The reason you want that is you want that graft, when you're cutting, to come off smooth and make a nice smooth surface. So one thing I want to show you with rootstock is, and I'm just going to take a cut off this one. This particular rootstock, Bud 118, I don't know if you can see that, but it's red wood. So the nice thing about that is if you had the top die off and then you had something come up from the bottom, you'll know pretty well whether it's rootstock or it's top, because if it's got red wood, it's going to be rootstock. If it's got white wood, it's generally the top. And so that's a little value you get for having this. I tend to keep all my rootstock, all my scions, and these are all scions. They're in the fridge. They're all cut now, and they're all bundled. They're all bundled with a masking tape label. This one here says Bill's Red Flesh. And that way you go into there and you get as many of these you want and you graft them up. So before we get started on grafting though, I want to show you the process. The grafting process is done cutting like this in front of you. And the idea is, I got to make sure everybody can see that. The idea is you're cutting off little fine slivers that are flat. And what you're making then is an oval. Can you see that oval? That oval then is what you're matching. And you want an oval that's exactly the same size on the rootstock as on the scion on the top. And so that's the challenge. It takes lots of practice, but it does come. So
Harry, I just want to interrupt for one quick sec and let everybody know that you can get Harry full screen by just tapping on the right upper corner of your Zoom screen where it says view and go to speaker view. And then you'll have Harry fully on your screen. Sorry to interrupt, Harry.
how do I get
Go ahead.
myself on this full screen? I'm not full screen yet.
I
I'm
think
not
you
full
would do
screen.
the same thing. Go to your view function in the top right of your Zoom,
Yeah,
in your Zoom screen, and it will give you the option of full screen. And you also want to click on, I think, speaker view.
okay. I can't, anyway.
Well, we can see
Anyway.
you full screen if that
But, okay,
makes you
I
feel
can.
better.
Anyway, no problem.
Good.
No problem. Okay, so let's take a look now. And there's no guarantee this is going to work because it's a bit trial and error. But anyway, I've got a rootstock here. And I've previously taken the caliper. You have to use a caliper. The caliper is how you will select the width of the oval. Okay, so I have got a caliper and I've already previously marked this. You can see a little mark where I've taken some wood off because the size that I want is the size just below that. So this is the caliper. That's going to be the width of the oval. Okay. And I've previously done a little bit of cheating because I've gone on this one and I've got the same size on this piece of blush rosette. Blush rosette is a red flesh apple out of California. So the idea when you're doing cuttings, when you're doing grafting, is you see all sorts of little chips like this. These are all chips, flat little chips that come off as you are cutting. And the idea now is that I've determined the width of the oval. What's going to determine the length of the oval is the angle. If I get a sharper angle, it's going to be a smaller one. If I get a very slight angle, it's going to make a longer oval. But the challenge is just to make that oval the same length. So let's see what we can do here. And no guarantees, but let's see if we can do it. And I guess you can see that, yeah. The nice thing is when this knife tends to go through, you can see the oval right there. Okay, this knife tends to just go so nice and smooth along that and makes a very flat surface. Okay, so that is the oval on the rootstock. I've got the mark right there. The white mark shows where I want to be, and I want to be just below that white mark. So I'm going to try, get the same thing. Now, that's too long. In other words, I got to cut more of an angle. So I'm going to cut more of an angle. That's too short. So sometimes you're playing back and forth like this, and then you are measuring, and you're seeing that the white, which is the cyanwood, is a little bit short. So I got to make a little bit longer. So there's a little bit of trial and error there. That looks like I might have it right about there. Okay, so that's the idea. So the calipers determine the width, and the angle I cut at determines the length of that oval. And you want the ovals matched so the cambium will connect and the sap will flow up there. Okay, the next step is you need the tongue. The tongue is what gives it the strength. And I've got I've patented this where you just put some masking tape on your finger here, because you're going to be cutting down directly towards that finger. So this is the idea. I want a cut straight down in the wood, and that's what you call the tongue. So I'm going to come up to what I call the 75% mark, and I'm going to put a mark, I'm going to put a cut right down with this X-Acto knife. And I'm going to do exactly the same on this, which is the scion. Okay, and obviously this tape is designed so you're not going to cut your finger, plus you're not going to cut too far into the wood. So it's got a double factor. Now, what you do is you take some nice clear tape. This is a non-sticky tape. This tape is just designed to keep it together, and it'll stay on till about July. Now, the real nice thing about this is when you put it together, they should slip together. Oop, I better do it here.
Can you hold it higher?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to go down where I could see it well. So those two then fit together, and you can see then that it's not too bad. I shouldn't be seeing much white. If I'm seeing any white, it means maybe I'm not getting a good match. So that's not bad. The idea is I wrap, and now I start wrapping at the bottom, and I never will touch the top of that. You never touch the top because there's no strength in that. You don't want to pull it apart. So you always pick it up by the bottom, and you lock in the bottom first before you do any wrapping at the top. So I'm going to wrap that, and I let this finger here is going to stretch that tape nice and tight. So I'm riding the finger against the graft, and then I'm going to go right up, cover all the graft. I'm going to bring it down, and then when I get to the bottom, I'm going to stretch this, and I'm going to bring it around, make a little loop, because I want to have a loop here. I want to have a loop that I can see, because I'm going to be on my hands and knees in July in the garden trying to undo this. How do I undo it? I just pull that piece down and it'll undo, and you'll take the tape off, and that should be strength. Now, the neat thing about this one is I generally leave 2 or 3 buds. There's 1, 2, 3 buds on this one. So there's 3 opportunities for growth, and obviously I only need 1. Every tree is created from 1 bud. So 1 out of those 3 will grow, and I will let them grow, and then I will take the strongest. The strongest will be the one that becomes the tree. And like I say,
have you grafted most of the trees that are in your orchard? Have you done this process with most of the trees you have in your orchard?
Most of the ones are grafted. The only way you're going to get 200 trees of different varieties is to graft your own, because no store.
Well, I've never seen. It's fascinating. I've actually never seen grafting done before. I mean, it's way over my level, and I don't know if I would ever do it, but
Well-
it really is very fascinating.
Don't count yourself short.
Okay,
Now, what I have to do is I have to then put a piece of white tape, and this white tape is my sign that it is a Bud 118, which is going to be a full-size tree, a good-sized tree. But this tree, the value of Bud 118 is that it will not need any water after 5 years. And that's important in areas like ours, especially that's dry for most of the summer. Okay, so that then is the tree. And when I put the labels on, I will just attach the label to this. And if you're making labels, the best label you can make is you cut the wall out of a pop can or a beer can and cut it into 6 pieces and just write on that on a phone book, and you will indent that and you will have a label that's good for 100 years. The thing people don't realize about pop cans is that I'm not writing on aluminum when I'm writing on plastic, because every can of pop and beer is lined with plastic. And the pen flows so nicely over that plastic, it makes a great label. Now, the roots obviously have to be kept wet. So downstairs when I'm grafting, I put these into a pail of water for the evening, and then at night when I'm finished, it goes into the pail of sawdust. Now, for those of you interested in something a little more exotic, is you can take this big root and you can make it into a dwarf by doing what's called an interstem. And there's not many people doing an interstem, but it's so valuable. The rootstock determines the size of the tree. Okay, so Bud 118 is going to give you a fairly big tree that goes to about 16 feet. If you get something like a Bud 9, it's going to give you a smaller tree at about 10. The only problem with dwarf rootstocks is they tend to be weak. They're a weak root, they tend to make a weak top, and so they take a lot more water. Now, what this interstem does is a bit of magic. It takes a very vigorous root, and then what I do is I put about 6 inches of a Bud 9 piece in the middle here, and I put my regular top on it. So what I've got now is a dwarf, but one that's going to be very, very efficient at collecting water and keeping this top going. So that's called an interstem, and to me, an amazing way to go.
so Harry, that is amazing. I'm really hoping that we will have an opportunity to bring you up to our Quadra Island and
Sure.
Cortez Island gardening groups and actually have a hands-on workshop.
Yeah.
For most of us, we're at the stage where we just are hoping to get our pruning done.
Yeah.
I don't mean to foreshorten your grafting demonstration, but I'm just aware that it's almost 5 o'clock, and I wonder,
Okay,
would this be a good time to get into some of the discussion about pruning and some of the questions that we're
Yep.
having?
I have
Great.
4 o'clock here. What time do you have? I only have 4 o'clock.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. We've been going for a half an hour. It's 4 o'clock. You're
Okay,
right.
sounds-
Sorry about that.
No problem, no problem.
I've been wonky on my time ever since the time change
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
So
Oh.
what are you doing in the way of
1 second.
pruning in your orchard at this time? Oh, we got a dog.
My dog.
Yeah.
Well, I am probably the worst example of pruning because I never get to all my pruning. I pruned all the smaller trees because I needed scion-wood. So I go through all the orchard and do the small trees and collect my scion-wood, but the bigger trees, don't look at them as a good example of pruning because it gets pushed aside and very seldom done. But anyway, I'm hoping to do a bit if I can get some time because I got extra help now.
And also, I just want to respect that there are going to be people here today who are just going to be wanting more information on grafting. Is it okay if I post your email if people want to connect with you directly, as well as see what apple varieties you have available? You said that you
Yeah.
send out all around Canada, don't you?
Yeah, I sent you a link yesterday to the varieties that are available now. We're getting down so that most of them are sold, but we have some. Okay, I'm just going to continue on a little bit with the grafting idea, and letting you know that grafting is the reason that we have things like Gravenstein. The original Gravenstein tree was found about 1600. And Germany, Denmark, and Italy are all fighting over who was the one that who found the first Gravenstein. Gravenstein was a Mother Nature gift. It was a chance seedling, and somebody found it. Now, it was so good that somebody kept grafting that and grafting it and grafting it and grafting it. And so the idea is that I have a Gravenstein now because someone through time has leapfrogged the DNA from that Gravenstein by grafting it over time, so I can get the same DNA. One thing that does happen, just sort of a fluke of Mother Nature, is that sometimes you can get a sport. And if you want to look at Gala and Royal Gala, they are considered two different varieties, but they're the same family. And a Gala tree all of a sudden created a branch that had more red on it. And so then that was like a natural mutation that created a sport, which someone called red Gala or Royal Gala. So that's one of the variations. Now, I want to
And you
look at,
specialize in red flesh apples, don't you?
yes, I do.
Like that seems to be a specialty of yours.
Yes, yeah. I've got probably the biggest collection in Canada right now. And well, I don't have a lot of room in the orchard to plant new ones. So if I get a new variety, I got to kick something else out. Let's look at tree size and shape variations. That's important. There's two things that can determine size in a tree. Number one is rootstock, as I mentioned. So it's very important to have the rootstock. And as far as I'm concerned, Bud 118 is the best rootstock for the coast. Now, there's also variations that are created by the actual variety itself. So trees like King and Gravenstein and Bramleys, all those trees that every heritage orchard had, they're called a triploid. And they tend to be bigger than normal just because of the nature of them. I've got one called a Poppies Wonder, which is an amazing Cox cross that was created in Victoria, and it tends to only spread 8 feet. So it's a beautiful tree to get if you don't have the full room for a full-size tree. It's on the same rootstock, but it only spreads 8 feet. And then the other ones are the columnar trees. And the columnar trees are an amazing idea of another sport that happened in the Okanagan on a Macintosh. So columnar trees grow straight up, no pruning. They grow apples on little wee spurs. You never have to prune them. They're going to go up 12 to 15 feet. You plant them 3 feet apart. You can plant them in pots if you want. And there's about 8 varieties of those that exist. I have all of them here. And so that's another way that the variety has made the difference. It's on the same rootstock as a big Gravenstein tree, but yet the top is this stick. Basically, it's apples on a stick. Okay, let's look at a few other variations now. Pollination day. Apples need to have a blossom out at the same time in order to get pollen to transfer from one to the other. But there is about a 2-week variation between the very first of the pollen of the flowers coming out and the last one. So Gravenstein has a very early blossom, and Northern Spy has a very late blossom. So you wouldn't expect those two to pollinate. And what we've got is a relative term called pollination day, where we assign them a day, someone has assigned them a day, And all you have to do is match up the pollination day within, let's say, 3 or 4 days, and you'll be okay. Now, the nice thing about pollination day is that it works here, it works in Quadra, it works in California because it's a relative thing. It's, let's say, based on the day that the Gravenstein comes out. If you've got, let's say, 6 or 8 trees, you never have to worry about pollination because there's probably enough to cover everything. So pollination day is one of the characteristics that's important. I mentioned earlier triploids. Triploids are kings, bramleys, Gravensteins, all those amazing, amazing, huge trees that all the pioneers had. They are triploids, and the triploid characteristic means that the pollen is infertile. So in other words, a Gravenstein with one other apple tree will not work. You need 3 trees because the pollen coming from the Gravenstein is infertile. It sounds like an apple salesman big line, but it's not. It's true. Okay, sports we talked about. Gala and red gala is a sport. It's a natural variation. Harvest dates, they can go anywhere from, let's say, mid-August for the transparent to, let's say, early November for the Braeburns. And that characteristic will vary a bit based on weather, but it's a fairly common and constant number that's important. Generally, if you're planting a home orchard, then you want apples that you want trees that are going to be apples all through the season. So you wouldn't get all your apples ripening at the same time. You would try to get a mix of that. The keeping quality, generally, the best keepers are the ones coming off the tree at the end of the season, like Braeburn, Northern Spy. Mother Nature was smart enough to know that you don't need to make the early apples keep because there's more apples coming. So what we're going to do is just focus on the last ones. And if you really want them to keep a little bit better, then pick them a couple weeks early and let them ripen. Let them ripen then in storage, and that will give you a little more time in storage. Most apples tend to ripen at the same time. I should say most apples on a tree. A variety will tend to ripen mostly at the same time. When there are a few exceptions, some of my early varieties ripen over a 3-week period. And so that's really quite good again for a homeowner, because then you can just pick the real red ones and it'll keep you going for about 3 weeks. So it's a pain for anybody that's doing it commercially. And that's why most of those trees will not exist in a commercial orchard. But for a homeowner, it's pretty amazing. Again, the coast here is a little more moist. It's a little damper. It's let's say not too much below 0, but nevertheless, in the summertime, it's also not as hot as it gets in some of the other areas. So we're a more moderate climate, moderate in both the winter and the summer. The next characteristic that's interesting is there's something called a tip bearer and a spur bearer. So spurs are little wee stubs that are going to produce apples, and they're not going to grow next year. So the spur is a beautiful thing to find, a spur bearer, if you're doing, let's say, an espalier. That will keep constant and you'll not have to do any pruning, and it'll be very good that way. On the other hand, if you got a tip bearer and you're trying to espalier it, you're going to be cutting off a lot of that. And if the apples are coming on the tip, there go your apples. And the tip bearers also tend to weigh the tips down. So in other words, your tree, it's hard to maintain the shape. Fortunately, most trees are a mixture, so we don't have to worry too much about that. You will now see on your apple trees, you'll now see if they're over 5 years old, you'll see some of the fruit buds, and the fruit buds are quite big. They're probably about that big right now, maybe 6 millimeters long. The leaf buds are nice and tight to the branch. And Mother Nature again has designed it so the flower buds are going to come out first, so that the flowers will be there for the bees and there'll be no leaves in the way. So right now I can go out and I can pick on some of the young ones I've never tasted. I can say, oh, I might get apples this year. You still can't count on it because in the first year, blossoms don't always mean apples, but you're playing the odds. Hopefully they will.
So Harry, do you think that it's too late to do pruning for those folks who haven't
No,
gotten out there and done
No.
some tip pruning?
no.
No.
pruning's
At
not-
what point is it not advised to? Is there a point at which you don't want to prune, or can you
Around-
pretty much tip prune throughout the season?
Around here, you should be able to prune all year long. The only thing I would suggest is the bulk of the pruning is done now before the growth starts, with one exception. Don't cut off those suckers right now. Cut the suckers off in July. The suckers, if you cut them off now, are going to rebound with 2 or 3 more suckers. But in July, they're not thinking about producing vegetation. They're thinking about producing apples. So get rid of them in
Oh.
July. It's hard to hold back, but yes, go for it.
That's amazing. Do you know that's the first time I've ever heard anybody say anything like that? That's
Well,
a fabulous piece of information. We have a couple questions. Harry, what are you recommending for pest control on apples?
I just leave lots of diversity in the orchard. I have blackberries around and I don't seem to have much of a problem. I have chickens roaming the whole orchard and hopefully they're eating bugs on the ground. And so I don't have too much of a problem. Obviously, some get culled and those become apple juice, but yeah, I don't have much of a problem. Diversity is the secret.
So I love that approach. Are
Yeah.
you doing any kind of sulfur spray or anything like that?
No, I actually have what I call a control group. I'm a do nothing type of thing. I want to show what happens if you do nothing. And I don't necessarily believe in the sulfur spray. It probably helps to keep down scab. But the other thing to remember, if you get apple scab is the apple's way of fighting off a fungus, especially in the spring. And within that apple scab is medicine that will prevent cancer, salvestrol. So if the skin's not broken, I would urge everybody to eat an apple with scab on it because it's going to make you healthier. City people would never
So
do
are
that, but
you-
country people usually do.
Yeah, good point. So you're saying that this is sort of the apple's own immune response that we can benefit from by
Yep,
eating it?
Exactly. It's called salvestrol, Salvestrol. In wine, in grapes, you have resveratrol. You've probably heard of that, but not too many people have heard of salvestrol.
No, I have not heard of it. I'm absolutely fascinated. We have been learning more and more though about the way plants produce their own immunity and that we can benefit from that. We have a question from Lynn for you, Harry. She
Go ahead.
wants to know what the difference between dessert apples and eating apples are. What
I don't
is the
think-
difference?
I would say there's no difference in that. The one difference would be cooking apples. Cooking apples tend to be a bit tartar, you see, and tartness is what comes up in flavor in an apple pie. But if you like tart apples, then it'll be something you want to eat. So it all depends on what each person likes. But generally, the dessert apples would be sweet or sweet tart, and then the tart would be the cooking apples.
You must have quite the tasting fair going on. Did you say it's October 3rd, your Salt
October
Spring
3rd, yeah.
Apple Festival?
Yeah,
Great.
we generally have about 80 varieties for tasting here, and that's one of the highlights of our orchard is that the people get to taste what's here and they can really zero in what they like, not what I like, but what they like. Mhm.
And are these red flash apples that you specialize in, do they tend to be a very sweet apple?
Everything. I tend to be everything. Sweet tart is actually my favorite. And the one fault with our society now is our society has gone towards sweet, when in fact the sweet isn't doing us any good. The sweet tart and the tart are much better for us. A Bramley has way more vitamin C than a sweet apple.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Larry in Vancouver. From the Lower Mainland, Larry is asking you, when is the best time to do summer pruning of apple trees? Early, late July, August?
Anytime in the summer, July, August would work, anytime in there. Yeah, trees are pretty forgiving.
Mhm. Well, we had a gentleman from Cortez Island earlier this spring, and he had a very similar approach to yours, Harry. He was also very hands-off and didn't do any spraying, did very little pruning. So I think people are going to be very happy to hear this news from you. We have a comment from Lynn from Powell River. She says, my one apple tree, I can't identify the species, has gotten worms for the past 4 years that she's had it. It's about a 20-year-old tree. I've used many holistic methods and nothing yet has fixed it. Do you have any advice for Lynn?
I'm sorry, I just can't, that's a hard one. Especially if she tried all the holistic things. If she tried, I'm sure she's tried some good fertilizers like let's say seaweed and manure and all that sort of thing. You're trying to make the thing healthy. One thing I might tend to do is that you could, on an older tree, you could always take some of this mycorrhiza, get a bar and poke a bar down in, and then mix up maybe a teaspoonful in some water and pour it down into the soil around the drip line. And what you're trying to do is get that mycorrhiza attached to the root, and that might help. It's a long shot, but nevertheless, yeah.
So your approach is that the healthier that we can make our trees, the more resistant to pests and all diseases they'll be, it sounds like.
It's like you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, you've mentioned the seaweed, you've mentioned the mycorrhizal. Is there anything else that you recommend that we can be feeding our trees, feeding the soil around our trees?
Well, any natural fertilizer will work, and also maybe more on salt spring than quadra, but mulch, like a wood chip mulch is very important in the summertime to keep the moisture in. So that really helps as well. You're probably not as dry as we are in the summer.
Yeah, I don't think we are. A question also from Lynn asking you, what is a crispy, medium sweet apple that you could recommend? She's looking for something crunchy and juicy. That's quite the combo.
Well, there's only, out of the 200 varieties I grow here, there's only one that's not crisp coming off the tree. They're all crisp coming off the tree except one. Hall's Pink came from a beach up in the Courtney area, and it tends to be softer off the tree, and it's lighter. It floats higher up in the water. There's more air in that apple for some reason. But every other apple is going to be crunchy. The important thing is to pick it at the right time. You need to know your trees. You need to be able to say, that tree, you should pick it October 20th. And then you'll keep an eye on it and you'll test it and you'll pick it at the right time. That way it'll suit you best.
Wonderful. Another question about the Agriculture Canada apple breeding project. Do you know anything about that, Harry? Is it still going on?
I have no idea. I have a couple that came out of the Okanagan, but I've got people, individual people, amateurs on their own that are doing breeding as well. So I have a friend in Nanaimo doing lots of apple breeding, meaning she's planting seeds. I have a grower in Ohio that's doing that. I have about 4 of his varieties here. So I don't know what is happening in the Agriculture Canada process.
Well, it sounds like you're really encouraging people to start experimenting on their own.
Of course, yes.
A question from Kathleen for you, Harry. She says, I have a 100-year-old Gravenstein,
Wow.
and she would like to plant, wow. I would like to plant 2 more trees, including an Ambrosia. She lives near Horseshoe Bay with south facing close to the water, and she's asking your advice. What should she plant? What 2 would you recommend?
Okay, well, we'd have to look at something that's gonna, one question for her then is, does she get a good crop off that Gravenstein tree? If that's the case, it means there's other apple trees around that are providing pollen and we don't have to worry about pollination. So.
Kathleen, if you'd like to just unmute yourself and
Yes,
answer.
thank you so much, Harry. The tree is not getting as many apples as it used to because, of course, there is increasing development, right?
Okay.
And it's not as many apples. I would say 10 off the tree last year.
Okay. So that could be due to the age of the tree and the health of it, or it could be due to lack of pollination. But the one thing you could do is plant something that is going to provide pollen for that. And I'd have to check my database, but if you get something in around day 10, that should hopefully work. And the other thing that's really amazing, all the red fleshes are great, but all the Cox crosses are good. Cox orange is the favorite eating apple out of England. And I grow about 20 Cox crosses. A Cox cross is an apple variety that came from a seed from a Cox orange pippin. And so they are fantastic as well. The other thing is it's a little bit hard for me to say because it would be great if you could taste one you like and then you know exactly what you want.
Thank you, Harry.
No problem.
Did that help, Kathleen? I hope that helped.
Yeah.
A
Thank
comment
you.
and a question from Jan. Oh, thank you. Jan is saying, Harry, how many other apple varieties are needed for pollination? I think you mentioned 3 for a triploid.
Yeah.
But what is the general rule of thumb?
2. All you need is an exchange
2.
of pollen between 2 different varieties. They have to be different varieties. Okay. Now, if you get a triploid in there, then you need 3 because the triploid is shooting blanks. Okay. So, and then those 3 should all be within 4 days of the pollination. If you got neighbors with apple trees, it's not a problem because they will have pollen coming off their trees.
So if somebody wants to buy some apples from you, say somebody hasn't started apple trees before, would you be able to help them make the selection based on where they live and
we could
what the
probably,
pollination?
we could probably do that. Yeah.
That's great. We have a question from Lonnie. This is in relation to that tape you were using when you were showing us how to graft. She's asking, is that flagging tape or some other special kind?
It's just a regular tape. Flagging tape is a little bit too wide. This is 1/2 inch. It's a 1/2 inch tape that's clear, non-sticky. And I'm not even
Okay.
sure where I can get it now. My supplies have decreased, but basically it's just a 1/2 inch tape. Flagging tape, I think, is a 1 inch. But anything, if I had to, I'd even cut strips out of a piece of 2 mil plastic. But somewhere there's got to be a source of that.
Okay, thanks for that. Just clarification on the name of that rootstock that you were recommending. Is it Bud
It's Bud
118?
118. Yeah, 118. It's a Polish rootstock.
And you also made mention of a Bud 9 rootstock.
Yes.
Was that for something specific?
Well, Bud 9 is the standard dwarf rootstock. So it's from the same company, the Budowska company in Poland, but it's a Bud 9. So if you wanted to do a dwarf, you would use a Bud 9. But if you really want to do it better, you do an interstem using a piece of Bud 9. That interstem
Okay.
piece was Bud 9. So it takes 2
Okay,
grafts
thank you
to
for
do an
that.
interstem.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, John McKenzie. From Lynn, a question about how tall the dwarf types will grow, Harry.
They should be about 8 to 10 feet. I have lined my garden with interstems because I don't want them shading the garden.
So 8 to 10 feet approximately.
Yeah, yeah.
And how wide of a canopy do they create?
Generally about the same size. So a 16-foot tree, Bud 118, I usually ask for about 16 feet of space. More if you can get it, because you want to get ladders in between. So
Yeah, good reminder. A question from Marlene, please. Marlene is saying or asking, should apple trees be limed? If so, when?
Well, I hope if she means limestone, there's a difference between lime and limestone. Limestone is just natural limestone that's ground up, and it's very weak and it's not going to harm anything. Lime itself has been worked in a kiln, and it's very, very powerful. So I would recommend limestone, but I also use oyster shell. And to me, oyster shell is even better because it's got all the minerals from the ocean with it. Not sure if you got any oyster plants up your way on Quadra.
Oh, yeah. Lot of oyster farms
Is
here.
that gourd
So
carver?
another part to her question, yes, Cortez Island has gourd harbor.
Good.
And Harry, what are your thoughts on using cedar needles or any other kind of conifer needles for
I
mulching?
don't use cedar. I avoid cedar, but I don't worry about the other types. The mulch I get is from a planing mill, and the mulch is usually hemlock and fir. The big thing with that is you don't want any products in the breakdown that are harmful to the soil. And cedar has some of the products that keep cedar from rotting tend to be more toxic.
Mhm. I think most of us are using something other than cedar. A question from Lonnie, how far apart do you plant your columnar trees?
3 feet. They make a beautiful hedge.
Wow,
I just sold
that's
8.
beautiful.
I sold 8 of them today, and they were going to become a hedge.
What a wonderful idea to have an apple hedge.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
amazing.
And they beautiful. The blossoms are beautiful. They are just a most amazing tree. You couldn't imagine that many apples on one tree. Yeah.
And are you selling the columnar versions as well, Harry?
I'm sold out this year, but I will have some next year, yes.
Karen has an interesting comment here, wants your opinion. She says, I only got one big apple on my, and she doesn't know the name of her 4 to 6 year old grafted tree. She's asking you, why do you think that was? Could the birds have eaten the buds, perhaps, she said?
No, I think the tree is teaching her patience. You just have to have faith in your tree. If it's well treated and well fertilized, then it'll give you lots of apples. And don't be in too much rush, because if it would have given her 10 apples this year, it's going to give her 0 next year, because it would have done too much work this year. The one exception to that is Northern Spy, which does tend to take 12 years to produce. So that's one of the quirks in production.
Wow, 12 years to
Yeah.
produce. That's phenomenal.
In 2
I'm
years,
just scrolling through. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, once that Northern Spy starts producing at year 12, within 2 years, it'll have produced more than the younger trees anyways, because if it's not producing apples, it's building up green, and green is your money in the bank. All the branches and leaves are green deposits in the bank to make better apples next year.
I really love your perspective, Harry. You've got a long range perspective. You're kind of hands off. And you do a lot of observing, it sounds like.
You have to.
A question from Colleen for you. Yeah, you do have to. Harry, Colleen is asking, are there varieties that work especially well for Espalier? You mentioned the spur bearers.
Yeah.
Are there any specific varieties?
Well, number one is spur bearer. An Espalier must be a dwarf. And then all the Coxes tend to be spur bearer. So a Cox dwarf would be out of this world for Espaliers. And the other thing too,
Okay.
Coxes are a less vigorous tree. So it's not always going to be tried growing, and you're trying to keep it down in place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Justin is asking about planting the B118 trees. I'm asking, if you were planting a 1 acre orchard field, how close would you plant them? He's planning to do it without spraying and using your approach of the biodiversity.
Well, 16 feet would be the closest. So if you were doing 20 feet, looking to the future, that would give you 100 trees per acre if he's got lots of room.
Great. We're getting quite a few questions about codling moth and apple maggot. I guess people are really hoping you've got a magic bullet for us, Harry.
I don't have it. The only I can say is keep your trees healthy, get mycorrhiza on them. And, especially the nice thing now is every tree I planted 50 brand new ones. They all got half a teaspoon of mycorrhiza right on the root as they were planted. And I did also take out a couple 20-year-old trees on M111 and replace it with a 1-year-old bud 1 Now that's a setback, but in the long run, it's the best thing. Those trees were not going anywhere. They hit a brick wall. They're not producing good apples, so had to go. In other words, don't piss me off.
You may Harry will get out there with his saw, you guys. You better be careful, right?
Yeah.
You may have already answered this question, but what are you recommending for a pollinator for Gravenstein again?
I'd have to look at my book. I'm looking for something in
That's
around day 6. The other thing too is for people that have questions, I will never sit down and answer, 6 or 8 questions on a computer. Somebody can phone me and I'll answer 6 or 8 questions, but I'm not going to sit and type answers to 10 questions. I just, I don't have time for that sort of thing. But a phone conversation is
Of
different.
course, fair enough. And,
Yeah.
and that's why we just feel so grateful to you taking your time today, Harry. I want to thank you again
No problem.
for doing this with us. This is real gold for people who are growing apples.
Good.
A question about treating a warty lump condition that is bursting the bark of a tree, showing the pinkish new growth of the lump breaking through. It's happening most at the tree stem where branches are connected. This is a question from Melanie. Any help on that front?
Well, I've got a couple of those and I'm not sure what it is, but it's getting cut out and burned. Hopefully it's not, it's above the first branches. So I have a tree, a Cox orange. Cox orange are considered to be a little bit weaker tree. It comes up to about 4 feet. It's got a nice set of branches. And then above that is like a disease mark on the tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the branches below that and lead it up, bend it up so it becomes a leader. And I'm going to cut that disease out and burn it. So it's not, it should work. If it doesn't work, if it comes back again, then the whole tree goes. But so.
Well, it'll be interesting to know. So you basically recommend cutting it out or
Just, well,
realigning it?
with a sharp knife, if you can get rid of that, get rid of the disease part and still leave enough bark, then that might work. I'd have to see it.
Well, yeah, fair enough. Have you used neem oil ever for disease or pests,
No.
Harry?
No, as I say, I'm trying to be a
No.
control group where I use nothing. The one difference, I shouldn't say I've never ever sprayed, because if you do a soil test, and by the way, I would recommend a book called The Intelligent Gardener by Steve Solomon. It's the best book going for soil. And he allows you to tune up the nutrients to the right level. But in some cases, the rains we get really take away a lot of the boron. So I have a sprayer that will allow you to put down a certain amount, a very, very minor amount of boron, which comes from borax, which is a laundry soap. It's a natural product. But again, you have to, Steve Solomon will give you the exact quantity to use. I think it's 2 parts per million maximum. The last thing you want to do is put down too much, because then you've made the problem even worse.
And the book is The Intelligent Gardener by
Intelligent
Steve
Gardener
Solomon.
By Steve Solomon, yeah. It's
Great.
a must read, and he'll give you worksheets in the back based on a soil test of how you can bring that soil up to where it should be.
Fabulous. Thank you for that. A little clarification for Alan. Alan is saying when you refer to a test for picking at the right time, are you referring specifically to a taste test or something else?
No, when you get apples, first of all, you know roughly the time that they're going to be ready. Gravenstein in around the 10th of September. So you're keeping an eye on the tree. Are there apples falling is number one. Number two, if you take the apple and you lift it up 90 degrees, you should hear the stem should pop off or let go. And if it comes off without fighting, then it's ready. If that stem fights you, it's not ready. Just leave it a little bit longer. That's the best way.
That's great. We have a question from Whitney. Whitney, if you're still with us, maybe you could unmute and ask this question yourself. While you do that, a question about oyster shells. Are you using ground up oyster shells? Is one of the questions.
I would use oyster shell ground up, but I can't get it ground up. So I just use oyster shell coming right out of the oyster plant. So, and it will break down in years, but not the same. Now, one thing that's interesting about oyster shell, an addition I didn't mention before, is that two conditions in apple trees can be solved with oyster shell. Number one is called bitter pit, and it will be sort of little marks on the skin that sort of go into the flesh. And number two is water core. Water core is like a glassiness you get in the flesh. It's especially prone to happen on king apple trees. If you put down some oyster shell, maybe a couple wheelbarrow loads onto your tree, those conditions are all caused by lack of calcium, and the oyster shells will really make that condition a lot better.
Oh, that's great that you can just use whole shells when you have to. Thanks for that question, Janice. So if you have them smashed up, that's great. But if you don't,
Yeah.
use them as is. What about eggshells as a source of calcium, Harry?
Oh, sure. Great.
Eggshells.
But you can't get that many of them. So I use, so far I've used 1 truckload of oyster shell this year. So
Wow.
oyster shells work, of course. They're great.
Wonderful. We have a lot of them on the islands.
Yeah.
Whitney, are you with us? And if you are, you can unmute and ask your question. Are you there?
Sure, yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just curious about the interstemming. So
Yes.
generally you're putting a dwarf on at the middle there onto sort of an intermediate rootstock.
Yes.
And then do you find that the dwarf wants to grow quite a bit, so you're having to prune back from that interstem section?
Well, yes, the idea is you only want growth coming off the top. But the other thing to tune that up and just moderate that is, if I've got some growth coming from that interstem section the first year, I'm not going to take it all off, because of that growth is going to cause sap to be flowing across the bottom graft, okay? So I just want sap flowing. So I would be moderate at taking off any cuttings below. You can take it off the second year if you want, but like I say, as long as you're getting growth in the interstem piece, at least it's meaning you're getting sap flowing across the bottom graft. Hopefully you want growth coming on the top, and all of mine don't necessarily produce growth on the top, you see? So I might have to graft them the second year to get an interstem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Cool, thank you.
Lucretia is muted.
Thank you, Harry. I appreciate that. I've probably asked this question a few times, but it just is still here. Tell us again your best compact variety for an espalier.
Well, number one, it
Best
would have to be a dwarf, and secondly, the Cox crosses are very good, because Cox is not so vigorous and it tends to be more spur bearing, and the apples are fabulous.
Okay, I'm highlighting that this time, so I won't have to ask you for a third time. Thank you. You're sure patient, Harry. A question about what variety your apple hedge is that you're, I think you mentioned that you were going to put together. That's from Karen.
The hedge is a package I sold today of 8 trees that went over to Surrey. I have more what I call a columnar forest. I put about 15 or so trees in an area where they're all about 5 feet apart, just to demonstrate how they're going to grow and put them all together.
That must be really amazing. A columnar forest.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. That would be, yeah, that sounds beautiful. Karen is also asking, and I think I know what your answer is going to be, how can I help my one apple tree improve?
Well, the first thing you do is you look at it and see if it looks healthy. If it looks healthy, then you're in good shape. If it doesn't look healthy, then you have to somehow give it some nutrients, something that's going to make it healthier. Could be water, could be mulch, it could be fertilizer, it could be anything like that. It could be lack of sunlight. So it all fits together. Roots from other big trees could be interfering too. It's a hard question to answer without specifics.
And I imagine planting another tree for pollinating would be useful.
Well, I wouldn't plant a tree just for pollinating. I would plant a tree that's going to give you amazing apples that does have the blossoms out at the same time. So in the Okanagan where they've got monocultures, yes, they will graft one branch of a pollinator onto one of the trees because they need pollination. But I don't have a monoculture, and I don't think anybody up on Quadra has a monoculture.
Not that I've seen, fortunately, other than
Yeah.
maybe some of the forestries here. So you've
Yeah.
mentioned the mycorrhizal, the seaweed, composted manure, a little tiny bit of boron,
Yeah.
being really careful not to have too much, oyster shell or any other source of calcium. And someone is asking, are there any other things that you recommend for feeding apple trees?
It's more a question of
That's from-
what you can get available in your area. That's what's important. The one thing that I have to watch out for, because I'm certified, I have to really watch out with horse manure now, because horse manure, if they're feeding any corn to those horses, corn would be GMO probably, and I cannot use GMO manure. So even though there's only a little bit of that, it's become a real pain in the ass for me, that GMO corn. So that's the only
Yeah,
thing
I
to worry about. The other thing I
Good. I think it's a
would
pain
be,
for all of us.
I'm really leery too of any commercial composting sites, because if they're taking stuff, let's say from the city, leaves and grass, it could be coming from a yard that's got pesticides in it. So as an organic farmer, I have to guarantee my inputs, anything coming onto the farm.
Well, I think most of us want to grow organically as well. So your experience and wisdom is fabulous. Larry's asking if there's a way to actually keep your tree producing consistently. You've talked about one year having a lot of apples and the next year not so many. Is there a way to have a really productive tree every year? And is that even ideal?
Well, the one thing, if it's overcropping one year, it'll definitely do less next year. So you can prevent an overcropping by thinning. That's what they tend to do. And hopefully that will get into a normal cycle then.
Okay, great. Karen is saying she wants to consider replacing her one apple tree with an apple hedge. You've got people thinking about this apple hedge now, Harry.
Mhm.
She's just wondering if you have any other information on how to approach that. Would she get those columnar apple trees from you and do them as a hedge?
Yep, that would work. I'm sold out this year, so depends what I'm grafting up for next year.
Can
I should
people
have some-
pre-order from you?
Oh yeah, definitely, sure. Yeah, I've already started a
Great.
file for next year.
Wonderful. Well, that's a good answer. And Lynn from Powell River is wondering where she can get that mycorrhizal that you recommend.
There's many different types. Some of the good gardening stores will have mycorrhiza. It's wasn't around 6 years ago, but it's becoming more common now. I actually get mine sent in to me from, have you heard of Paul Stamets? Paul Stamets did the YouTube video, 6 Ways That Mushrooms Can Save the World. And he has a company called Fungi Perfecti down in Olympia, Washington. And so this comes from him. But I think you'll find that mycorrhiza is more available locally now in nurseries too.
Great. And Whitney, who's still with works sometimes with Paul, so she might have a lead on where we can get
Yeah.
that stuff too. Whitney,
Yeah.
if you want to put that in
Yeah.
our chat.
Yep.
Jan is asking, Harry, if now is a good time of the year to graft, or
Uh,
is January better?
Well, I like to graft this time of year because then I have cyanwoods that I've just cut and I hold the trees for a month, and then April would be a good time to put them out. So timing wise, I start about the 1st of March for my grafting, but it's up to her, however she wants to do it. But the one thing I would really recommend is that hold those grafted trees in a warm area, warm meaning, let's say 16 Celsius at least, for a month, and you're letting them heal.
Great, thank you for that. We have a question from Yvonne about using the mycorrhizae. Are you able to use it any time of the year, or is it just when you're planting that you want to use it for your trees?
Well, ideally, the mycorrhiza is a root association. I want it right on the root. So the best time for me to use it is right when that tree is going in the ground. It gets about half a teaspoon on the root of the young tree. So you can use it any other time, but you know,
That
it's
is especially the
it's
time to
easier when
use
you're
it.
planting. I did plant some raspberries this year, and anything that's already potted, you can just plant it and then mix up a slurry of mycorrhiza and just pour it around the tree to get the mycorrhiza down into the roots. Okay, but my trees, when I plant them, are bare root, so it's easy to get the mycorrhiza on the root when they're bare.
So it's almost like a compost tea, or a liquid foliar, not a foliar feed, but a root feed, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, yeah.
Great. Well, we're coming up to our 5 o'clock time. I want to be able to give
Okay.
you your parting words. Thank you so much for being so patient with me, first of all. I know the connection wasn't great. Just reminding everybody that Gabbing About Gardening is based on donations. If you feel like you'd like to contribute, the address is lucretia.shanfarber@gmail.com. That's LUCRETIA.shanfarber, SCHANFARBER @gmail.com. And we share what you contribute with our guests, and or their chosen contribution, or the charity that they subscribe to. So Harry, anything that you'd like us to contribute to, we will on your behalf, because you've been so generous with your time today. And we also support a variety of other ecological and permaculture projects in various countries, including our local islands. We help
Good,
people here. Next week, we
I
have.
just got one thing to say when you're finished.
I'll turn it over to you in just a moment. Just reminding everybody that next week, Gabbing About Gardening has Gabbing About Growing Lavender with lavender growing specialist Judy Kemchand. And the week after that, we have Connie Kuramoto talking about growing herbs, including cannabis, for you folks who are interested in that. So we're going to turn this over to you, Harry, and listen to your final words of wisdom. Thank you again for joining us today.
No problem. I have something that came out of, I think it was the last Whole Earth catalog in the 70s, and it's such a great thing to pull this together. This is called the layman's law of the universe, and there's only 3 laws. Number 1, everything is connected to everything. Number 2, everything's got to go somewhere. And number 3, there's no such thing as free lunch. In other words, every act has some sort of an environmental impact. Thanks for giving me a break today, folks.
Oh, it's been absolutely wonderful. We're so grateful. And I've never learned so much about apples at one time, Harry.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank
Okay.
you everyone for joining Gabbing About Gardening. We'll see you next week. And I'll post more information about what Harry's up to. And we'll keep you abreast of his catalog. I'll make sure everybody gets copies of what you sent to me as well, Harry.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody. See you next week. Thank you for coming. Nice to see you, Janice, Marta, Elizabeth. We'll see you next time. Vivian, yay. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week in the garden.
Bye.
Bye-bye.